We just brought you CBS News Confirms new reporting on fake videos of President Biden that are being referred to as cheap fakes. So let's bring in our political panel, Meghan Hayes and Matt Mowers. Meghan served as the director of message planning for the Biden administration, and Matt worked on the Trump 2016 campaign and also worked as a senior advisor for the former president. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for being here. Matt, I'll start with you. You know, what makes these videos and images so insidious is it isn't just anonymous social media users who are putting them out there. It's the New York Post. It's the Republican National Committee who are disseminating these things, and that lends them an air of authenticity. Should the RNC be in the business of putting out videos like this, or I mean, if they want to attack him on his age, attack him on his age. That's a perfectly legitimate issue, right?
Well, and they have attacked him on his age.
Yeah.
And not only that, but, the reason these videos even have some ability to land with voters is because a lot of voters, it's picking up on a kernel of truth. I think that's the bigger challenge.
But does that mean it's okay?
Well, and they should be very careful about making sure that the videos they put out are an accurate representation. Although I'm sure we're shocked, as folks have been around politics and political campaigns, that someone would maybe clip something mildly out of context. I've never seen that before. Yeah. Not on any campaign I've ever worked on. But all I'll say is that the reason they do is because they know it's a narrative that's a problem for the White House. They also know that it's one that can't really go away.
Right.
And that as much as there might be a video where they're clipping it a second early, there are countless videos out there where they don't have to. They can play the full minute clip. And it is challenging video for the president. And it's tough to explain away when it's true video that's actually showing the president at a moment that maybe is showing his age.
Meghan, because this feeds into a pre-existing concern that voters have about really both candidates and their age, how should the Biden campaign approach this? What is their strategy?
Look, I think they need to lean into his age, right? Like, no one's trying to hide that he's 81 years old. Everyone knows he's 81 years old. He talks about it. But I do think with the Trump campaign and the RNC, like, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Trump is only a few years younger, and these are types of things that they could clip. Someone else could clip something that makes him in a bad light, and that's also not good either. I'm not suggesting that the Biden campaign do that. I'm just saying that, this is like the season of campaigns, but age is one thing for both of them that they need to combat. And so I do think I would lean into it if I were them. I'd put him in front of voters all of the time and have him do those retail stops, as you've seen him do many times. And that's where he thrives, and that's where you'll really see Joe Biden being Joe Biden.
You were a top campaign aide in 2020, then you worked in the White House. When you were on the campaign, you were around him more than just about anybody. Have you seen a change, an erosion in his mobility over the past few years that can be attributed to more than just aging 3 years?
I haven't been around him every day since I left the White House, so I actually don't know what he is like today. When I was there, he definitely had a lot of pep in his step. He would outwork all of us. We would be on a trip and we would all be sleeping and he would be working. So, I didn't see it when I was there as much as, other people. Is he as, probably as fast as he was when we were in the vice president's office or when he was in the Senate? No, absolutely not. I think he's, that comes with age. But in terms of what he is like today versus when I was there, I can't speak to that. But I mean, I think that the president is very busy doing, as you just saw, he did 2 foreign trips, went to LA, and he did a speech today, and he's, working hard for people.
Matt, there are lots of questions about President Trump's mental and physical fitness as well. Is this really an issue that the Trump campaign wants to draw attention to?
Well, look, I think you can say a lot of things about President Trump. But one thing you can't say is the guy doesn't have stamina. I mean, he goes up there for an hour-and-a-half long rally and riffs with no teleprompter. I mean, that is, as someone who's run for office, I can tell you that is
sometimes the things he says up there are a little confusing.
Well, sure. I mean, in an hour and a half, any of us standing up there going with no teleprompter, we'd occasionally slip up on a word or two. But I'll tell you, that takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of stamina. Folks are going to question President Trump's policies. Maybe they question temperament, the rest of it. I don't think anyone is truly questioning whether he has the stamina to do the job, not just today. And here's the real question I think a lot of voters are saying. They look at President Biden, they say, we get that, he's 81, there's going to be a slip up, but what about 85? And that's the question. A lot of voters are saying not just how are each of these candidates going to act today, but what's it going to be like 4 years from now? I'll tell you, I've had, foreign diplomats who've met with the president and asked that question, saying, what is this going to look like in 4 years if he's reelected? If those are folks who are diplomats from other countries in meetings with the president asking those questions, certainly it's questions that are going to be asked by the American public.
I want to ask you guys about the new debate rules that came out today. The debate between President Biden and former President Trump is taking place next week, and they're really interesting. Basically, the rules include no opening statements, no audience, candidates' microphones will be muted when it's not their turn to speak. They yelled over each other quite a bit the last time around, and they aren't allowed to bring any notes with them. What do you make of those rules? Do you think they'll be effective?
I do think they'll be effective. As someone who was at both the debates in 2020, the yelling over each other and the jeers and stuff from the audience, I think it's distracting. I think that this is a time where the American voters need to see these people debate the issues, and they need to make a decision. And this is one way to do that. And I think that making sure that it's even playing ground and they're not yelling back and forth at each other or trying to talk over each other or play to the audience, I actually think that's a really smart idea.
It's a fine line, though, right, Matt? Because if you can't ever interrupt, then it has the potential to become basically a joint interview, a question to one and then a question to the other.
And look, I agree. I think having an audience there sometimes can be distracting. We saw that in the Republican primary debates this year, especially when there's stadiums. And you, especially with commercial breaks during these debates, which we don't normally have. But I agree. I think the rules are a little over-cumbersome. They're going to restrict the ability to have that dialogue, which, yes, there were moments in 2020 when they're talking over each other. The debate almost was unwatchable at times because you couldn't hear what they were saying. But those are the moments that really give the American public glimpses into who these two individuals are, how they're going to react in certain situations. What noises are they making in reaction? Are they keeping their cool in those moments? I think we're losing a little something with that because of the debate rules. And hopefully in future debates, we can actually see the true interaction between the two candidates.
I don't think muted microphones are going to change that true interaction. But I mean, one can hope that we don't hear the yelling. But I think we will see the interaction.
I have a feeling that they're going to be doing some talking even when their microphones are muted, and we might be able to pick it up. Really quickly before you go, Vice President Harris is appearing with Quavo of the group Migos down in Atlanta today in a battleground state to talk about gun safety, an issue that is back in the news because of the Supreme Court decision last week about bump stocks. What do you make of her decision to go? And should Republicans embrace a bump stock ban if it's something that President Trump himself supported 6 years ago?
Well, look, I mean, this, to your point, I mean, this is actually allows Donald Trump to go out there and highlight an area that maybe he is, quote unquote, more moderate on Second Amendment issues or gun rights issues that could actually help him maybe make inroads with some of those suburban voters in key counties, whether it's Oakland County in Michigan or Chester County in Pennsylvania, a few of these areas where he's going to need to actually, pick up a few votes. Not to mention the fact that Kamala Harris is now going clearly on defense by going and speaking to a Hispanic group in Georgia. This is a group of voters that traditionally has been lock, stock, and barrel with the Democratic Party. You see recent polling showing Donald Trump possibly winning a majority of the Hispanic vote. I think it shows a lot more defense than offense based on where the vice president's going today.
I think this also highlights that the president and the vice president have done all they can on gun safety issues and that Congress actually needs to act now. And I think that this is highlighting that issue as well and that they will do more if they are reelected push Congress to do more. So I just think that this is an important issue that she needs to highlight. The vice president, I think, is a great messenger here for this.
Meghan Hayes, Matt Mowers, thank you both so much. Really interesting conversation today.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.